Jeb Bush is doubling down on his brother's Iraq war. He recently came out and said that he kinda sorta supports it and he would redo it if he were to become president. Here he is with some follow-up comments on that.
I'll tell you, though, that taking out Saddam Hussein turned out to be a pretty good deal. In 2009, Iraq was fragile but secure. Mission was accomplished in the way that there was security there, and it was because of the heroic efforts of the men and women in the United States military that it was so. And that is a fact. And you can't take that away from anybody who served, and you can't take that away from, you can't rewrite history in that regard.
Taking out Saddam Hussein proved to be a pretty good deal. No, it didn't. Nowhere near it. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and prove it to you. So if there's anybody who's listening to the show right now and they're wishy-washy on this point, or they say, well, no, I see good arguments on both sides, or whatever, if this is your line of thinking, let me just give you facts. Let me just give you numbers. And you come to your own conclusion about this. So here are the consequences of the Iraq War. First of all, there were 189,000 direct war deaths, which doesn't include the hundreds of thousands more that died due to war-related hardships. This is according to Business Insider, by the way. Next, we have 4,488 U.S. service personnel killed directly. 32,223 troops that were injured. That doesn't include PTSD. There were 134,000 civilians killed directly. There were 655,000 persons who died in Iraq since the invasion that would not have died if the invasion had not occurred. So in other words, part of that is the sectarian violence that we riled up when we went in there and destabilized the region. Let's continue. There are 2.8 million persons who remain either internally displaced or have fled the country. $1.7 trillion is the amount in war expenses spent by the U.S. Treasury through fiscal year 2013. Obviously, that's more now. $5,000 was spent on the Iraq War every single second. Every second. That's U.S. tax dollars. That's middle-class Americans, poor Americans. $350,000 is the cost to deploy just one American military member. $490 billion is the amount in war benefits owed to veterans. $7 trillion with a T, trillion, is the projected interest payments due by the year 2053, because, of course, a lot of the war was paid for with borrowed money. Whatever happened to fiscal responsibility, conservatives and George Bush? You started this war and you put it on the credit card. $20 billion is the amount paid to KBR, the contractor responsible for equipment and services. $3 billion is the amount of KBR payments that Pentagon auditors considered, quote, questionable. I don't just consider them questionable. I know what happened to that money. It was fucking stolen. It was taken for profit. $3 billion was taken by defense contractors and put right into their pockets. Okay. $60 billion is the amount paid for reconstruction, which was ruled largely a waste due to corruption and, quote, shoddy work. Still not done. $12 billion is the cost per month of the war by 2008. Here's what's missing. $546 million in spare parts, 190,000 guns, including 110,000 AK-47s. It's a great place to lose guns, right? Iraq. It's not like there's going to be some monstrous group called ISIS that rises from the abyss and then takes those weapons. Oh, that's right. That's exactly what happened. 40% is the increase in Iraqi oil revenue. $5 billion is the revenue from Iraqi oil in 2003. $85 billion is the revenue from Iraqi oil in 2011. That's a big increase. $150 billion is the amount that oil companies are expected to invest in oil development over the next decade. $75 billion is the approximate amount expected to go to American subcontracting companies, the largest of all of them being Halliburton, the one that Dick Cheney was involved with. And finally, I got one last number for you here that puts it all into perspective. 0. You know what that is? The number of weapons of mass destruction found in Iraq. Now, remember, the first thing they said was Saddam's responsible for 9/11. He was working with Osama bin Laden. Turns out that is factually incorrect. That didn't happen. So that's untrue. We went to war based on that, and it turned out not to be true. But then they said, okay, well, he has weapons of mass destruction. Well, that's not true either. And by the way, let's say it is true, even though it's not. They pretended like Saddam was going to launch immediately, like Cleveland was going to be destroyed in a heartbeat. But again, they made that up. Even if he did have them, which he didn't, this idea that he would launch, Saddam is not Osama bin Laden. Saddam is a Ba'athist. So he's not, up his own ass with his religious fundamentalism. The Ba'athists are relatively secular. So he knows if he launches against the U.S., he would be destroyed immediately, and he wouldn't want to do that. And then they just move the goalpost to what? Well, he's just a bad guy. When all else fails, just go, he's a bad guy. Well, there's a lot of fucking bad guys around the world. We do business with a lot of bad regimes. That doesn't mean you go in there and topple them and you let Americans die and you kill civilians on the other side. That's not a rational standard. So, I leave it to you guys. You can make your own mind up based on these numbers, I think. Was it worth it? Was it a pretty good deal that we got Saddam Hussein? And also, isn't it true that what we have now in Iraq is significantly worse than Saddam Hussein? Don't get me wrong, Saddam Hussein was a brutal dictator. This is a guy who was horrendous to the Kurds and horrendous to the Shias. I get all that. But wasn't Iraq in a better place, and wasn't it more stable when you had Saddam Hussein in power? I don't think Iraq should have existed in the first place. It's a fake country that was made in the 1930s by Western powers. It's really three separate countries put in one. But when they drew the borders and they sealed the fate, after Saddam Hussein was in power, why the fuck should the U.S. get involved and topple him and fuck up the region even more? Again, wasn't it better off under him than it is right now? I think if you look at the cost of it, which I just went through for you, that answer is pretty clear.